go ahead and take a seat. Welcome. My name is Jericho. I am one of the pastors on staff. It is great to see you. Thank you for those of us joining online as well. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my sister Jasmine and I loved to go garage sailing with our parents. Now, we would go out Saturday morning, and one Saturday morning we were garage sailing, and my sister and I found a pair of rollerblades. We'd never been rollerblading or roller skating before. We were so excited. We begged our parents. There was just one pair. Mom, Dad, please, please, please let us get these rollerblades. Well, they agreed. They bought us the rollerblades. We brought them home, and we learned how to rollerblade. Now, when I say that we learned how to rollerblade, what I mean is our house is at the bottom of the hill, so we'd walk up to the top of the hill with our rollerblades, pull them on, coast down the hill into this little green grassy strip next to our house. So we'd slow down in the grass, kind of softly land in the grass, take the rollerblades off, and walk on back up the hill again. And that's what we did, up and down, taking turns. And we had a ball. We loved coasting in our rollerblades. Now, one day after school, I had a lot of homework. So instead of starting out with rollerblading with my sister, I went straight to my room, started working on my homework, and my sister thought, I'll just go rollerblading while I wait for Jericho to finish her homework. So she grabbed those rollerblades, walked up to the top of the hill, pulled them on, and as she started putting them on, she realized, I've got to go to the bathroom really bad. Now, she could have just walked down the hill quickly to the house, but she thought, light bulb, I'll just put on the rollerblades so I can go faster down the hill, so I can get to the house faster so I can go to the bathroom. So she pulls on the rollerblades, she starts coasting down the hill, and then it happened. She couldn't hold it. And she started peeing her pants, pee running down her legs, coasting down the hill in these rollerblades into our shared rollerblades. Now, I had no idea. I was blissfully unaware of this. She gets down to the bottom of the hill. She takes the rollerblades off. She's mortified, embarrassed. She goes inside. She tells my mom what happened. My mom helped her clean up. I am totally unaware. I come on out after a little while, finished up my homework. Nobody's around. I walk outside. I see the rollerblades sitting on the warm, hot cement, all steamy. I grab those puppies. I walk on up to the top of the hill, pull them on. Sister must have been a little sweaty. Don't know what's going on. Start coasting down the hill. And I had a grand old time up and down and up and down and up and down all afternoon. I go back inside the house. I took the rollerblades off first, set them down on the sidewalk outside, walked in. Hey, Mom and Dad, had a great time rollerblading. My mom is sitting there. You know your sister peed in those rollerblades. What? I was mortified. I was so mad. Now, while this is a funny story today, I don't really remember exactly what my process looked like or felt like for forgiving my sister. But I can guarantee you I probably struggled with it. I tell that story because there are funny things like that from our childhood or things we can look back on and remember about things that we've had that have come up, that we've experienced, things people have done to us, that we have a choice to forgive or to not forgive. But there's also some really serious things that happen in our life. And for some of us, some really horrific things that happen where we're faced with the decision to forgive or to not forgive somebody. And today, we're continuing along in this series that we've been doing called Red Letters, where we're going to talk about the topic of forgiveness. Stephen last week kicked us off with this series, and he explained how the name of this series, Red Letters, comes from, sometimes in some of the versions of the Bibles that we read, have Jesus' words specifically in a red font. Now, it doesn't make that red writing necessarily any more special than the black writing that we see in the rest of our Bibles. But in this series, we want to specifically focus on some of the teachings, the red letter teachings of Jesus. And so Stephen started us out last week with this series where he talked about Jesus' red letter teachings on love. Today, we're going to talk about Jesus' red letter teachings on forgiveness. We're in the Gospel of Matthew today, which is Matthew's account of the life of Jesus. And Matthew is one of Jesus' hand-picked followers. Sometimes we call them disciples. Now, Jesus choosing Matthew is a big deal because Matthew's a Jewish tax collector. And Jewish tax collectors were viewed as sellouts, as traitors to their own people because they caved to working for their oppressors, Rome. And not only that, were they sellouts and traitors, but they actually, most of the time, were cheats and dishonest because they would pocket money. They'd collect above and beyond what was required to pocket money at the expense and become wealthy at the expense of their own people. And so tax collectors, Jewish tax collectors were one of the last people that Jews would have wanted to extend forgiveness to. And so Jesus choosing of Matthew would have stirred massive ridicule, huge controversy, indicative of the Jews' own resistance to forgiving some of their own people. And so right from the start, just Jesus choosing Matthew is huge because it points to Jesus's desire in everything that he does to live out practically the message of forgiveness. So we're going to look today in Matthew's account about a story that Matthew records of Jesus talking about forgiveness. And here's what he says in Matthew chapter 18. Verse 21 and 22. Then Peter, another one of the disciples, came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Now, Jesus isn't really saying 77 times literally. Some versions of our Bibles even read 7 times 77, or in other words, 490 times. Honestly, I can't imagine somebody doing something to me or saying something to me that hurt me 490 times and still giving them forgiveness. But that's the point here. Jesus is using extreme exaggeration or hyperbole to make a point that it's not about the number. That isn't the qualifier for why and how we should forgive. There's some other rabbis or teachers like Jesus who also taught on forgiveness, and their qualifier for how often you should forgive was if somebody commits a wrongdoing against you, or they say something hurtful, whatever it is, up to 3 times you can forgive somebody for the same type of thing, and then you're off the hook. And so Peter, he probably would have known this teaching. He probably would have heard this before. And so when he asks Jesus, "Should I forgive them 7 times?" He thinks, wow, that's probably really generous. I'm so generous that I would suggest 7, not 3. Until he heard Jesus' further explanation. Now, Jesus is going to go on to illustrate his point by telling a story about what forgiveness should look like. And usually when we read scripture here, we'll put it up on the screen here, but I actually just want to read it straight from the Bible because I want to read it to you the way Jesus would have told it to his disciples. And so I want to read it to you like a story, because it is a story, the way Jesus would have told it. And so if you have your Bible and you want to follow along, great, or a Bible app, we're in Matthew 18, picking up right where this ends at verse 23 through 35. Here's what Jesus goes on to say about forgiveness. This is the story he tells. "Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wants to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me,' he begged. 'I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, and he canceled the debt and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe me,' he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.'" Sound familiar? But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant,' he said, 'I canceled that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?' In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." And that's it. That's the end of the story that Jesus tells. So what happens in this story? There's a king who wants to settle his accounts. He wants to collect debts. And so a man is brought before him who owes him 10,000, some versions say 10,000 talents. What this is equal to, sometimes when we hear like terms about biblical currency and it goes over our heads because we don't really use that today, obviously. What this amount is equal to is 60 million days' wages. You heard that right. 60 million days' wages. There is no possible way that this man can repay the debt. Jesus is using massive exaggeration in this story, massive hyperbole. Honestly, as people are listening to Jesus tell this story, they probably would have been laughing their heads off. I can't believe he said 60 million days' wages. Now, this man begs for more time, like time is going to do anything. And remarkably, the king grants him more time. And he grants him more time, but even beyond that, he spares him from having to repay the debt. And he doesn't sell the family and all the possessions off or into slavery. Now, it talks about slavery in this, so I want to pause and talk about that for a second, because I would think and I would hope most of us would all agree it is just flat out evil and wrong. Slavery is wrong. But that's not the point of this story. And sometimes we miss the forest for the trees, where this story is not necessarily every detail and every character are representative of God or symbolic of something, or sometimes in stories we want to look for a symbolic meaning in everything. Is the king representative of God, and is Jesus permitting slavery because the king threatened slavery as punishment for unpaid debt? When stories were told in the ancient days, it wasn't necessarily told in a way where everything had a specific meaning. It was serving a greater purpose. And so while it is wrong and evil, that should be said, this story is about forgiveness. And the nature of this story points to how and why God forgives us and what it means to extend that same forgiveness to others. So again, the man begged for more time. The king granted him a favor far beyond that. He actually just forgives the debt completely, which again is just wild. Nobody would have expected that. People again are probably laughing as they hear Jesus tell this story. 60 days, million wages. Oh my gosh, and then the king forgives the debt? What? Then that servant goes out and he finds another man who owes him money. So this forgiven servant goes out and he finds another man who owes him 100 silver coins, it says. Now, this forgiven servant had owed 60 million days' wages. This other servant only owes him about 100 days' wages. Think about the math there of how much is owed him compared to how much he had owed the king. I wanted to break this down because I think this is important to see. It's 0.0000167. I have to count out the zeros or I might miss some here. That's the amount owed him compared to the amount he had previously owed the king that he was forgiven for. But instead of extending forgiveness, when the servant begs for forgiveness for more time, he doesn't even beg for forgiveness, he begs for more time, and I'll pay the debt back. Instead, he chokes him out and he sends him to prison until he can repay the debt, which was a debt he probably could have repaid had he been given more time. Now, the other servants are outraged when they hear, they go to the king. Can you believe this happened? And the king naturally is furious. And I would imagine he's furious for a couple of reasons. One, because this servant that he'd extended grace and forgiveness to had not internalized the message of grace and forgiveness for himself in how he treated other people. But also, I would imagine he's really upset and saddened because that servant's actions of not forgiving another are now representing poorly. They're reflecting poorly back on the king himself. Because I would imagine other people in the kingdom would have been looking at the king and thinking poorly of the king's character, thinking that king must not have any discernment of people's character, because if he forgave that servant and that servant went out and committed all this harm on other people, how could the king not see that this was not a good man? Why would the king forgive him? And so I imagine the king's really upset because of that, because it's reflecting poorly on him. And so he throws him into prison, he's upset, and he allows him to suffer the consequences of his enormous debt he'd previously owed, because he failed to extend the same forgiveness that he'd been offered. Now, it's easy to hear stories like this. That's the end of the story, it just ends there. It's easy to hear stories like this and think, of course, Jesus offers me forgiveness, I should forgive other people. I understand it's logical. Of course, I would never choke somebody out and throw them in prison. And I would hope that's true. I hope that's true for most of us. But I think we miss the big point here, in that stories like this that Jesus tell are often an extreme example or an exaggeration, not because it's something that we maybe have a harder time relating to. It's because we actually really do struggle with these things. And it may not look like the story Jesus is telling, but Jesus is telling it in a way to kind of disarm people. One, so they can maybe laugh about it, but then to really turn it around and be like, no, actually, this is a big issue for a lot of us. And we need to really think critically about what our extension of forgiveness looks like in the lives of those around us. Because when the rubber hits the road, we actually all do struggle with forgiveness. We all will experience some of us will experience really traumatic things, and we all will experience hurtful things in life. When we go through a messy divorce, for some of us, an ugly divorce, when maybe our spouse says something that we think is unforgivable, when we have a grown child that turns their back on us and doesn't want to talk to us anymore, when we have a friend who gossips about us and says something really hurtful or mean and refuses to re-engage, or a family member says something really heated in the moment and you don't want to engage them again because of how it made you look to other people. We will all be faced with decisions throughout our life where we're faced with a choice to forgive or to not forgive. When I was in college, my junior year, I had two roommates, two women that I just adored. I loved these ladies. They are some of my best friends still today. And a few years after we graduated, I was checking in with roommate A. I called her, was just hearing how life was. I shared with her where I was at. She was talking with me about some hard stuff she was going through and some good things, nothing really bad, just kind of general life update. Told me some stuff she was struggling through, and it was a great conversation. I got off that phone call, and I started texting roommate B, the same roommate from our junior year. And I started sharing with her about my conversation with roommate A. Now, it wasn't anything bad that I shared, but the problem is it wasn't my information to tell. And what I ended up doing, texting roommate B, I didn't just text roommate B, I accidentally included them in a group message. And I realized right away what happened, and that text just sat there with no response. And it was that bottom of my stomach just pit feeling of, ugh, just that ugly feeling of, oh my goodness, what did I do? Roommate A is never going to want to trust me again. She may not even want to be friends with me. Roommate B just watched all this happen. She's probably not going to trust me either. I immediately called roommate A and I just said, I'm so sorry. There's no excuse. I shouldn't have shared that. I hope you can forgive me. And I'm really terribly sorry. And she was quiet listening to me. And I'll never forget her response when she said, Jericho, it's okay. I forgive you. And she talked with me over the phone for a little bit, and she was even willing to go beyond that and was so gracious in her words and tried to kind of see the good in what I was doing. I know you're just trying to update our other friend. I get it. It's okay. And that feeling of guilt and sadness didn't leave me right away, but it lessened over time because my friend was willing to offer forgiveness to me, and she was still interested in pursuing a friendship with me and reconciling, redeeming that friendship. And I'm so grateful for the example she set before me. Now, a few years later, totally separate situation. My now husband and I were dating. We got engaged. We were so excited. And a totally separate friend texted me out of the blue. And I hadn't seen her in quite a while. She'd never met Alan before. And so she texted me, wow, so excited for you guys. I saw on Instagram you're engaged. Would love to meet Alan. How long have you guys been dating? And so I texted her back and forth a little bit. I said, wow, we'd love to get together with you, for you to meet Alan. It's been great. How are you doing? We've been dating for 7 months. We've known each other for a couple years, though. She sent some nice texts back. And then a few minutes later, she sent another text to me that I quickly could tell was not meant for me, that she meant to send it to somebody else, because it said, wow, ... they've only been dating 7 months, ... And I was furious that she would respond such kind things to me, but then be gossiping and telling other people, painting this horrible picture about me to other people. And I was so upset. And I think I was kind in my message back to her, but I wasn't interested in redeeming that friendship. And I'm telling you guys that in honesty and vulnerability, I actually just cut out that friendship completely. And I lost contact with that person, and it's regrettable. I'm not friends with them today. And I had just done the same thing to somebody else a couple years previous that had offered so much grace and forgiveness to me. And I went the other way, just like the unmerciful servant, and refused to offer forgiveness to somebody else. And so I think Jesus is telling this story because Jesus is right. We do struggle with this. And I know that's kind of just a more fluffy example of text messages, but honestly, a lot of us have really extremely hurtful things that we've experienced or we've done to people where forgiveness is just hard. It really is. And I think it's hard because we're afraid of what we think it will cost us. We're afraid to forgive because of what we think it might take for us or not allow us to do. Let me explain what I mean by that. I want to correct some misconceptions about forgiveness and first explain what forgiveness is not. So here's what forgiveness does not mean. Forgiveness does not mean that you forgive and forget, live without boundaries, only do it to rid yourself of resentment, in the sense that it's not only self-serving. I mean, there is a self-serving component that's good, in that it helps us to not live in bitterness. It helps us to not have a hold over us anymore. But it is also a gift to the other person, and so it's not all about us. And forgiveness does not mean you will get an apology. Sometimes you will, but all of us know sometimes you won't. Forgiveness does not mean you forgive and forget. Remember I told you my story about my sister who peed in my rollerblades? I did not forget that. That is locked in there. It does not mean you live without boundaries. I let those rollerblades sit on the sidewalk a long time drying out in the sun before I put those puppies back on again. It's healthy to have boundaries. It's healthy and a good thing to know what are some good guardrails I can have in the relationships with those of people who've wounded me. It doesn't mean that it's only for ridding yourself of resentment, and it doesn't mean you'll get an apology. We've often heard scripture quoted to us before about forgiveness, things like, don't let the sun go down on your anger, which again is a good verse, is helpful, but I think sometimes those things are twisted, and they're almost used. Forgiveness is used as a way, it's weaponized as a way to promote inauthentic healing. This idea of just forgive and forget, just move on. In the name of forgiveness, push down that pain, ignore what happened. It's okay, you'll forget about it, you'll heal with time. You don't need to have boundaries, you can trust that person again. And that's not what forgiveness is. We're afraid that forgiveness will cost us boundaries, or in other words, opening ourselves up to more hurt. Or that forgiveness costs us our ability to fully heal. That we just have to get over it by forgetting. And that's not what forgiveness is. And that's not what forgiveness should cost you. In a lot of ways, it will cost you, and it will cost you actually more than that. But it doesn't look like this. Desmond Tutu says this about forgiveness. And I love the way he puts it here. I want to read through this. Forgiveness and being reconciled to our enemies or our loved ones are not about pretending that things are other than they are. It's not about ignoring the reality of what happened. It's not about patting one another on the back and turning a blind eye to the wrong. True reconciliation exposes the awfulness, the abuse, the pain, the hurt, the truth. It could even sometimes make things worse. It is a risky undertaking, but in the end, it is worthwhile, because in the end, only an honest confrontation with reality can bring real healing. Superficial reconciliation can only bring superficial healing. I want to provide a helpful framework for what forgiveness can practically look like in our lives in an attempt to hopefully take away some of the fear of what we think forgiving another might cost us. Here's what forgiveness can look like. Forgiveness means you wish for someone's well-being. When I was in college, somebody did something to me that was extremely hurtful, and I could not stand this person. I didn't want to be around them. I did not like them. I did not want good things for them. And I was talking to a mentor about it, and she was telling me, well, have you been praying for them? I thought, oh, what a Christian answer. Of course not. And so she said, you don't have to pretend that you feel different when you talk to God about that person. God already knows how you feel. Just be honest. Tell God that. And you don't have to pray good things for that person if you don't feel that in your heart. You shouldn't pray bad things for them, but just start out simply with a posture of saying, God, I pray for fill in the blank, that person's name. If that's all the words you have in your heart, that's okay. And I got to tell you, I did not want to start doing that, but I did. And I did it for a week and then 2 weeks, and it was just, God I pray for, fill in the blank. That was it. That's all I prayed for them. That's all I wanted to pray for them. And it was the most remarkable thing, because after a few weeks of doing this, I noticed that I started to have more words. But it wasn't words of anger. It was words of sadness of what had happened. But it was words of also hoping the best for them and hoping for healing, even if that didn't mean that we were going to be friends anymore. It was words of wishing for their well-being. And my heart changed, but not because of me. It was because of God. Forgiveness means you let go of harping on the issue to others, in the sense that it does cost us. Forgiveness costs us our desire to want to keep retelling the story to other people in hopes that we can just recruit more people to our side. You're in my corner, you're against that person, come over to my side, let me tell you what horrible thing they've done. Forgiveness costs us our desire to do that. We can't keep on doing that. Forgiveness means you practice daily release. It costs us in the sense that it's really difficult to do. And there are points where forgiveness, for some of us, depending on how difficult the thing is that we're forgiving, it's not just something that we let go of one time and forgive and all's good, we're done. Sometimes it's a daily process of daily release, of opening up our hands and asking God, please help me to re-forgive. And the last one here, forgiveness means you surrender to God's power at work in you. I kind of hinted at this one earlier. Forgiveness is costly because sometimes it feels more than we can even give. It feels more than we even have the ability to offer somebody else. We can't give it oftentimes. But that's the beautiful thing that Jesus calls us to, is when it's in those moments where you don't feel the power inside you to do that. It's God's work in you. It's surrendering to God's forgiving power in your own life that allows you to come to a place where you're able to actually offer that in an authentic, genuine way that is good for you and the person who's wronged you. When someone hurts or disappoints us, our natural response is often to just split the world in two. Good, bad. This person's good because of what they've done to me. This person's bad because of what they've done to me. And when we're faced with a choice to forgive somebody who's wronged us, oftentimes the way we try to forgive that person is by just trying to get over what they've done to us, and we look at the problem and we look at what they've done and we focus on that as we're trying to forgive. And our focus and our aim is completely wrong in this, because our sole focus is the wrong that the person has done to us, not the person themselves. Forgiveness actually requires that we peel all that back, the wrong that they've done to us, what we think about their reputation, their track record, is it worth forgiving them because they might do that again, all that stuff, what other people think about that person, what maybe people have told you that you should think about them. We just peel all that back. We push it aside. And forgiveness requires that we shift our attention to the core of who that person is, which is God's child. They are defined as a child of God. They're defined by God as God's beloved. Not that there's not consequences. There are consequences for things that we do. But the core, the identity of who that person is God's child. And it's then when we're able to peel all that stuff back, that we're able to start the process of forgiveness. The 10 Booms are one of my most favorite examples of a family that experienced really radical things in life, but were able to forgive. If you're not familiar with their story, Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy and their father Casper lived in Holland during the days of Nazi Germany. They were Dutch, and they lived in just a really powerful example of loving people in the midst of really difficult circumstances, specifically by aiding and hiding asylum-seeking Jews. And they got stolen ration cards and were distributing those and created this whole network of safe houses. I mean, just really, really amazing things. During that time, another fellow Dutchman found out about what they were doing, started spying on them, and sold them out to the police. They were arrested in February 1944. Within 10 days of that family's capture, Betsy, Corrie, and Casper, their father Casper died within the first 10 days. The two sisters were sent to Ravensbrück, one of the most lethal concentration camps, and Betsy's health was poorer than Corrie's. Her health was starting to fail. She was dying. And Corrie and Betsy at that time in that camp found out for the first time the identity of the Dutchman who had sold them out. And Corrie she writes about it in autobiographies later, was just enraged because of this man's actions that had resulted in her father's death and now her impending sister's death as well. And she just could not even see straight, so enraged with anger. But her sister had a different posture. And so Corrie was curious about it, and she asked her sister one night in the concentration camp, as Betsy is slowly dying, she asked her sister this question. This comes from the hiding place. "Doesn't it bother you?" Corrie asked, in relation to the Dutchman. "Oh yes, Corrie, terribly. I've felt for him ever since I knew, and I pray for him whenever his name comes into my mind." Betsy, a few days after she had this conversation with Corrie, she died. But right before she died, Corrie and her had another conversation. And this is what Betsy told Corrie. She said, "We must tell people what we have learned here," alluding to forgiveness. "We must tell them that there is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still. There is no pit that is deep enough that you or I or anybody who's wronged you is beyond the hope of forgiveness. There just isn't." That type of forgiveness that Betsy modeled went on to inspire Corrie after she survived and was released. She taught that same message of forgiveness for years to come, inspiring so many people. But it wasn't because of anything Corrie did. Or anything Betsy did or Casper. It was because of Jesus' work in their lives. That was what made it possible to extend forgiveness in a situation that, frankly, most of us could never even possibly imagine being in. But there are things in life that we've experienced that are really traumatic and hurtful, and some of us atrocious things, where we think, I don't have the strength to forgive. I can't. And you're right, you probably can't. But God can do it in and through you. You are capable of that same depth of forgiveness, and you're capable of giving it to others, not because of you. It's because of Jesus. Because Jesus looked at us in our worst state, in our ugliness, in the things that we've done to hurt God and hurt others. He looked at us and he said, "You're still worth it." And Jesus died on the cross, giving us a second chance to pursue a relationship with God, and a third chance, and a fourth chance, and a fifth chance. Remember that story Jesus told? It's not about 77 times. The number doesn't matter. It's about the opportunity that we have to live in right relationship with God by loving others around us and extending the same type of forgiveness and love that we've experienced because of Jesus at our worst. Because it's God's power at work in you, not your own. Pray with me. God, I thank you so much for the ways that you have loved us beyond what we deserve. That you have extended your forgiving power, drawing us into relationship with you, calling us. I pray for those of us that feel guilty or feel ashamed, that feel like we need to hide from God. I pray that you would release that from us right now, that you would allow us to step into a place where we can know we are loved by you, we are cherished by you, that we are your beloved child. And I pray that it's from that place that our heart softens to the people that have maybe been coming to our minds during this time, those that have wounded or hurt us. Not that we have to be best friends with them again or even talk to them again. Maybe that is the appropriate step, but God, whatever that step is, I pray that you would reveal it to us and help us come to a place where we know how to respond in a forgiving manner that honors you and honors who you created us to be. I pray that you give us the power to do it. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.